The cartels have been in the news in the last several months, mostly due to the Trump administration's efforts to tackle cartel violence. But they're not exactly news in the grand scheme of things. In September and October 2024, when some people could still plausibly claim that Kamala Harris could be president, I took a trip to both former and current cartel territories in Latin America. In the process of filming and gathering stories, I got to meet two old collaborators of the sofa, some wonderful people who would be in danger if anyone finds out they talked to me for this series, but also several very shady characters who agreed to point me in the right direction on those things, under the condition that I don't mention their names and keep my pesky camera away from their faces. What resulted from this is a set of trade-offs which I hope I'll be able to bridge somehow in order to make an interesting enough series on cartels. And if not, at least I'll bring you some context to the global news, given that there will be a general election in Colombia in the spring of 26, and Latin American politics are bound to make into global news several times throughout 2026. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the introduction of the Cartel series. Initially, this series was supposed to be called Shifting Latin American Politics or something similar, but then a few weeks later, after I drafted the plan and the fundraiser, the Cartels stormed TC Televisión network in Ecuador's largest city, Guayaquil, during a live broadcast. The new war had begun. So this trip was now one of contrasts, one country slowly but not fully moving away from normative cartel violence, Colombia, versus one country rapidly entering an era of extreme violence. When I was taping these images in Guayaquil, the main cause of death among minors was homicide. That is to say, children were more likely to be killed in activities related to organized crime than road traffic accidents and accidental self-injury, which are the main causes of death for minors in Europe, for instance. About an hour after I taped these images, when the sun set and yet another blackout hit the city, an assassination attempt took place in the middle of this street. Yours truly was one of the eyewitnesses. To say that this tour was harsh would be an understatement. In fact, the violence of Guayaquil wasn't even the worst part of it. I would gladly return to Guayaquil because it's a lovely place, even with the cartel violence. The harsh part was the geography. Medellin and Quito left a long scar on my physical health. A trip around these places puts you into the very real physical context of what Dr. Thomas Sowell explained about geography in chapters 2 and 3 in the book Wealth, Poverty and Politics, published almost a decade ago. It's one thing to know the theory, but it's a whole different thing to suffer through the thousands of stairs every day for a lifetime. And do it while avoiding bullets, as the inhabitants of these places in particular have had to do for about a quarter of the century. Suddenly, the economics, the politics, and even the social mores of these places make a lot more sense than when you read about them in a book. But even with footage, it's still very hard to explain just how tough even the polished areas really are. It's like the whole landscape hates you. In addition to the stairs and the very steep streets, there's also the climate. Yes, it's perpetual summer, that's why it's called Ecuador, but at a median altitude of 2,850 meters, or literally over 9,000 feet. If it were in Europe, Quito would be in top 20 tallest mountains on the continent. When you see the sun shining in this footage, the temperature was around 25 degrees Celsius, but felt like 35 plus with very high UV and the corresponding risk of skin cancer. When it's shade, the temperature drops to 18 to 19, but feels like 8 or lower. And the wind is very cold. Always. 365 days a year. You're either sweating or you're mildly cold. Several times a day, every single day. While healthy, this is no big deal, but once you get one of the local flus, it's a constant attack on your immune system, and in my case this happened several dozens of times a day, every single day, for a whole month. It's actually a good story to tell to some doctors, as everything wrong with me disappeared almost instantly after landing back in Istanbul. I gotta say, I've never been that happy to be in Turkey as I was in late October 2024 after the transcontinental flight from Bogota. The reason I mention all of this in the introduction is because this represented the main limitation of the whole series. While I did hit all of the spots promised in the fundraiser, I did not hit all of the spots on my own list. I always have a bigger list in order to be able to deliver surprises, but these places make it impossible to move fast, and geography has a lot to do with it. In fact, once you understand why life has to be slow-paced here, suddenly some of the economic hurdles make so much sense. Imagine living on Mount Olympus, which is in fact slightly smaller, as in on a lower altitude, than some of the neighborhoods in Quito. Would you be able to maintain a fast-paced lifestyle past your adolescence? And if you say yes, then let's meet in Quito and have a quick run around the National Stadium. Another limitation on this series was, of course, time, since geography made moving around quite hard and more time would have helped. But then again, I'm not sure I would have been able to stay for longer without severe risks to my health. A lot of the truly interesting people here don't live in the flat areas and are not big fans of the camera. That's why a lot of the mainstream media's reports on this part of the world are so uninteresting, because the uninteresting people live in the easily accessible areas and aren't camera shy. It's just that they have very little interesting things to say. With one exception where I got lucky. I accidentally stumbled upon a protest by the Venezuelan opposition in exile in Bogota. And, well, I'm glad I didn't have the time to make the video then, as it would have been even more negative. Besides, in the year that passed, the leader of this shit show got a Nobel Prize, essentially for being an abject failure. So this will be the second episode, the Venezuelan opposition, Venezuelan migrants to Colombia, and how this quagmire that is also heavily affecting Colombia is unlikely to go away anytime soon. Best case scenario, not everyone will fully hate me for the next episode and will stick around for the other episodes, which I promise will be a bit more positive, though not by much. Episodes 3, 4, and 5 will be dedicated to various aspects of Ecuadorian politics, economics, and geopolitics. We'll be getting into how Quito became an unlikely hub for illegal immigrants to the United States, on why dollarization works and Javier Milei isn't really that crazy as Europeans make him out to be, and also how the Ecuadorian political establishment is doing much of the same crap as we see in Europe, except the consequences are far worse. I'm sure I forget some of the details, but the Ecuadorian friends of the sofa will also have to understand that most of the rest of the world is still unaware just how much of a laboratory for political experimentation Ecuador has truly become. Besides, if I'm not too worried about forgetting some details, the speed of production also increases a bit. Then, episodes 6 to 9 will be about Colombia, specifically the lessons everyone else can draw from Colombia's experience. Instead of a treatise on Colombian politics, what I want to offer is how other places can learn from various mistakes or wins of Colombia. For instance, Medellin has a lot to teach everyone else about urban revival, restoring safety on the streets, and in the process improving the economics of not just Antioquia, but of the country as a whole. By the same token, Medellin also has a lot of stark warnings for places as diverse as Berlin, Amsterdam, Samarkand, Lisbon, Budapest, or Siem Reap. Reviving a city and cleaning it up using foreign direct investment is very good, but doing so without triggering resentment is a fine art. And in episode 9, we'll go through that part. There's plenty of content out there on the internet telling you how great Medellin is, but very little in English about how it can truly suck and what can be done about it. And finally, episode 10 will be with some conclusions. By the time we reach there, more things will have happened, so I'll try to keep up with that as well. As hard as it was gathering the materials for this series, finalizing it should not be that hard provided that I resist the temptation to go too much into details, especially since I've already done that in the Propaganda Basement series. But all in all, the proposal for this series is to tell the stories you can't easily find somewhere else. Unlike other areas of the world covered in previous projects, Latin America is not that obscure. The city of Medellin receives at least 1.2 million foreign tourists every year. And by foreign, it is meant outside of the Andean community, which consists of Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. If those are counted as well, Medellin also gets more visitors than some countries of Europe, like Slovakia or Finland. But while it is not isolated, Colombia has quite a few stories that most visitors never hear, and in this series I'll try to tell some of them. Similarly, Ecuador used to be the place you'd go in the region for tranquility, as it was the country with the least amount of violence. A few months prior to me videotaping these images, all of that was turned upside down. So, all in all, you're looking at a mixture of both positive and dark stories, with no promise that I'll keep an overall positive vibe. The world is not always a nice place, and cartels are really bad for societies, as it turns out. So with that said, let's dive in. The next episode airs within 24 hours, as it's really timely considering the topic. The US is trying to remove as many illegal Venezuelans as possible, but Colombia has a lot more Venezuelans than the US has, and that comes with consequences. But more on that in the next episode. Until then, thank you for watching, thank you for funding this project, and if you really like this kind of content, please do consider becoming a member. The next planned series will in fact be in Latin America again, just further up north. And with that said, I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.